Romany and Raq by G Bramwell Evens. Give me the clear blue sky over my head and the green turf beneath my feet, a winding road before me, and then to thinking. Chapter 15. On Keeping an Even Keel. January. The other morning, as I sat in my study, I heard a ring at the bell. Then I listened to some kind soul telling my wife that she had bought her a pot of homemade marmalade, which she would like her to try. "You will find it on the stiff side," Mrs. Jenkins had remarked as she left. "My family prefer it like that." To me this sounded strangely reminiscent of Mrs. Jones's parting words as she put a pot of marmalade in my wife's hands as we left her house. "You'll find it rather syrupy, but we prefer it like that. It's homemade, so you know what's in it." How many times have I been out to tea, and before me has lain a splendid array of dainty cakes. My heart has been set on tasting a certain dish, but before I could state my preference, like a death knell to all my hopes, my hostess has said, "Try these, they are homemade, you know." On tasting them, that has been only too evident. "There is nothing quite like homemade," I have murmured with my eyes on the other dish, and inwardly adding, "Thank goodness." Strange it is how women will boast of cakes and jams that are homemade, yet will try to hide the fact that their frocks are homemade too. Strange too is the custom of depositing sample pots of marmalade in the houses of one's friends. No one ever leaves a rice pudding or a jam roly-poly, though these are homemade too. I wonder why. I think it must have been these gifts of marmalade that reminded my wife to try also, for one morning on entering the kitchen I saw a formidable array of empty pots on the table. She too was about to demonstrate the superiority of her recipe. "We are going to make some marmalade," said she to me, giving final polish to a huge brass pan. "Is it to be of the stiff or the loose variety? Rallentando on the plate or allegretto?" I asked gravely. "Or don't you decide which you prefer until you see how it turns out?" I rather think that this last remark of mine gave her the impression that I was a hostile witness, and she refused to be communicative. The manufacture of the marmalade has gone on, with spurts of feverish energy and with hours of unwonted calm. The oranges and lemons, I understand, will not fraternise unless reduced to infinitesimal shreds. These stand in water in the brass pan for 24 hours, and the aroma in the house at first is fragrant. It becomes more pronounced when at the end of that time the still is placed on the gas cooker. The study reeks with it. The bedrooms are steeped in it. Then the sugar has to be weighed and added, and once more the house has the odour of a toffee factory. Smell and stickiness are now everywhere. My wife is sticky, the maid is sticky, the little girl is like a flypaper. Sample saucerfuls are now placed on the step outside the kitchen door to see whether it will jelly. That is how Raq became sticky and how several samples disappeared. "Do keep Raq out of our way," my wife said plaintively. It was at this point of the proceedings that I felt I ought to consult John Robb on a matter of urgent business. As we left the house, my wife thrust a pot of marmalade in my arms. "Leave that for Sally as you pass. I promised her a jar, and keep it right side up." When we reached the shop, I saw that the old Ford was standing before it. I thought at first that John must be going out to see whether he could get a salmon, but I saw no fishing tackle in it. "Thought I'd have a run over to the metal bridge," said he, "to have a look at the river. Can you spare an hour or so?" "Nothing I should like better," said I heartily. In a few minutes we were threading our way out of the town. "This is the last ride you'll have in her," said John, patting the steering wheel and with a note of genuine regret in his voice. I'm sorry, I said in the same tone. Our outings won't feel the same in a new bus. She's been part of the fun. I've got a sort of affection for the old Tin Lizzie too, said he, and relapsed into silence. I had too. She had carried us through sunshine and storm. We had left her standing in soaking lanes and sodden woods. She had throbbed her way over stubble fields, and her back seat had known the touch of pheasant and partridge, grouse and snipe, hare and salmon. She had scars on her, it is true, and every one spoke of some adventure. She had sunk into ditches, waded fords, tried conclusions with gateposts, but she had never let us down. True, she had her own way of protesting, but that was only when we forgot to put water in the radiator, or thought that oil was too much of a luxury for her. Still, we forgave her these idiosyncrasies. Aye, said John, the missus says that she's a perfect disgrace, and that she won't ride her again. I've kept putting her off, but women are queer fish. They're like weasels on a trail. They get an idea in their heads, and you think they've forgotten it, when they don't mention it. Then it pops up again. The Jollinses have got a new car, I see, she said to me a week ago. And yesterday she said, I see our neighbours have a new Morris. I know what that means. What another woman has, every woman wants. So I've ordered a Morris. It'll save her a lot of nattering in the long run. Mind you, we'd never quarrel over it, but she'd mention it whenever she saw a nice new-looking car on the road. That is what is meant by peaceful penetration, I said, as we drew up by the side of the road and saw the river winding like a snake in front of us. We walked onto the bridge and gazed down on the clear water beneath. How beautiful the stones appeared over which it glided. Every colour was enhanced and polished. Pink and blue, topaz and sapphire looked up at us from the shallows. There's a fine fish, said John, pointing out to me a dark green back that lay like a submarine in the gentle current. Always nose upstream, I said. Aye, said my companion. If they were to turn round the other way, they'd drown. Even when they return to the estuary, they'd go back to the best bit of the way tail first. If they didn't, the water would get behind their gills and choke 'em. Further down the river, a fish suddenly launched itself into the air. Like a moonbeam, it flashed in the pearly light, a bow of shimmering silver, then plunged into the pool with a resounding splash. I wonder what makes them do that, I said. John shook his head. Can't say, he answered. They don't feed on anything after they leave the sea, so it's not like a trout springing after a fly. Some say that it rids them of the sea lice. Little round spots of black jelly they look like, but I think that they jump just for the joy of life that's in 'em. Lambs skip about in spring and hares have a mad frolic in the fields, so why shouldn't a salmon do a river dance if he wants to, eh? We left the bridge and found our way onto the river bank. Here Raq was in his element, and the water hens gave him elusive sport. Across the river rabbits disported themselves in the sunshine. Their burrows were high up in the river bank. Quite contentedly they watched the dog, making no effort to hide. They knew that they were safe with the river between them. Raq, too, saw them, and stood quite still at the water's edge, as though debating whether he should cross and introduce himself. Finally, he decided to pay them a visit. The rabbits unconcernedly saw him take to the water. Not one of them stirred, yet I could see that they were watching his movements very carefully. When in midstream, one of them sat bolt upright, ears erect. For a moment longer he kept his eyes fixed on the dog, then eased himself to a sitting position. Still the other rabbits showed no sign of alarm. Now the dog was within 4 yards of the bank, no doubt congratulating himself on getting so near to his victims. Suddenly the sentinel buck gave a loud thud on the earth with his strong hind leg. For a moment there was a commotion of moving brown forms, a flash or two of vanishing tails, and then the dog raced up the bank to find himself the only living thing to be seen. He sniffed at half a dozen holes in the vain hope of finding something to chase, and then, at my whistle, paddled back again across the stream. Further on we found a still pool, and in a sheltered spot we sat down and watched the minnows dance in the shallows. Once a big trout sailed by, and the minnows darted into the shallow creeks where the thinness of the water prevented the big dreadnought from following. "We should be able to fish in a month or so. Thank goodness the close season will be over," said John, nodding at the big fellow as he shot into deeper water. Then, having lit his pipe, he added, "Ever think we owe a big debt of gratitude to fish?" As I did not answer, John proceeded, "They were the first living things to swim on an even keel, the first things to know what right side upness means." I still fixed my gaze on the water, fascinated by the sinuous, graceful movements of everything which swam in it. "Aye," said John musingly, "Nature found a winner in the fish. All around her were clams, jellyfish and oysters. Then she hit on the idea of enclosing a brain in a gristly box, gave a spinal column which radiated scaffolding on which solid flesh could be built, and put an organ in its head which told it when it was on its back or on its side." "You mean she built her first ship?" I said with growing interest. John nodded. "And gave it a kind of gyroscope within its ear which gives it a sense of balance. No one will ever know how difficult it was for things in the water to keep their heads upstream or to swim in the right position. No one will ever know how often those early adventurers of millions of years ago side-slipped or swerved or found themselves on their backs when they wanted to be on their fronts. But the time came when that wonderful balancing instrument in the ear changed all that, and then, when that came into being, everything was plain sailing, or swimming, but a fish was the first thing in the world to use it." He looked at me with a smile and added, "You're looking a bit doubtful." "Well," I said, "it's rather hard to believe that a fish has passed this on to all living creatures." "It's true enough," John said, "and even though we got the instrument in our own ears, yet we've got to practise with it before it becomes perfect. Those children of yours had many a fall before they could walk upright. Think of what happens when you first learn to ride a bicycle." John looked at his watch. "Time we were getting back, I think. I told them at the shop I shouldn't be long." As I left John at his shop, I turned away from the old Ford, feeling that I would like to have expressed my feelings of gratitude to it. Then my mind turned to the subject of our talk. When I was a boy, it was quite a common thing to see a perspiring man propping up some sagging female who was trying to master the intricacies of riding on two wheels. What an epic could be written on the theme, "The Man Who Taught His Wife to Ride." How different that lissom creature who skimmed the ground like a fairy must have felt to him when, at an angle of 45 degrees, she deposited her 8 stone of female loveliness into masculine arms, one of which held the saddle, whilst the other gripped the handlebars. But such sights are things of the past. Probably the children of today learn the art of balance in early years. Soon after they can toddle, they are presented with a scooter, and the little organ in the ear teaches them to adapt themselves. After that, an ordinary cycle, or even a motorcycle, has no terrors for them. Halfway home, I looked up and stood gazing at a blue tit feeding topsy-turvy in the trees. I was wondering at its perfect balance when suddenly I skidded on a piece of orange peel. "My gyroscope," I said to the dog, who gravely watched my contortions as I regained my normal position, "is—" But I never finished my sentence, for, as I kicked the offending peel into the gutter, it reminded me of the marmalade which I ought to have given to Sally, and which still rested in the back of the old Ford. "Pray heaven," I murmured as we retraced our steps, that the marmalade has not lost its secret of right-side-upness. When we reached the old bus, we found, alas, a golden stream of stickiness running in all directions. "I'll have to tell your mistress," I said grimly, "that her marmalade is distinctly allegretto."